a heads up, there are spoilers in this episode, so if you don't want to find out about K-pop demon hunters or the Wizards of Earthsea, then you're forewarned. Welcome to the Philosopher's Tome. I'm Brady Guinn, and this is a space where we explore real questions in unreal worlds. Fantasy has often been called an escape, a flight from reality into dragons and wizards, kingdoms and quests. And it is. But I think of it also as a testing ground, a laboratory of imagination where we can try out the biggest questions of life. Questions about power, freedom, good and evil, identity, justice, and the meaning of it all. But in a way that's embodied in story and therefore safe. Because sometimes the best way to approach truth is not with a list of arguments, but with a tale. Join me on the Philosopher's Tome as we explore these philosophies in the writings that we love. Welcome back to the Philosopher's Tome. I'm Brady Guinn, still a non-credentialed philosopher with a curious heart, and today we're heading into some dark corners. The title says it all. From Earthsea to K-pop demon hunters, two worlds you probably didn't expect in the same sentence. Yet both are stories about one of the oldest philosophical and psychological truths we know, that the darkness we fear is usually our own. We'll talk about what Carl Jung called the shadow self, how Ursula K sailed straight into it with Ged in A Wizard of Earthsea, and why modern fantasy, even animated or pop versions like K-pop demon hunters, keeps returning to this same mythic mirror. Because whether it's a mage, a monster, or a K-pop idol with a sword, the real enemy is often the part of ourselves we don't want to see. Let's start with a bit of psychological philosophy. Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, student of Freud, and occasional mystic, believed that the psyche isn't a single spotlight of consciousness, but a whole theater of characters. At the center stands the ego, the self we think we are. But behind the curtain lives the shadow, everything we've rejected, denied, or refused to acknowledge. It's made of our fears, our envy, our rage, our repressed desires, and sometimes, maybe even more often, our unused strengths. Jung says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's the journey we see again and again in fantasy. The hero isn't just fighting a dragon, they're fighting what the dragon represents. Fantasy externalizes the psyche. It takes the inner world and externalizes it, giving us the chance to look at it and experiment with it. That's why Le Guin was so good at it. She was never writing about magic so much as metaphysics. In A Wizard of Earthsea, young Ged, nicknamed Sparrowhawk, is brilliant, proud, and reckless. At the height of his training, he tries to show off his power by summoning a spirit from the dead, and instead, he releases a nameless shadow. That shadow pursues him across the archipelago. From mist-covered isles to crumbling ruins, it follows, patient, shapeless, relentless. At first, Ged runs. He hides behind walls of magic, behind pride, behind the belief that he can outsmart what he refuses to face. But the shadow is tireless. It waits in doorways. It whispers in his sleep. It takes the shape of his fear. And eventually he turns hunter, convinced that if he can destroy it, he'll finally be free. Yet every spell he casts, every desperate chase across storm and sea only draws him closer to the truth. The shadow isn't some enemy that broke loose from the dark. It's the part of himself he tried to cast away. His anger, his arrogance, his longing, and his potential. And the moment he recognizes that, the chase ends. Because the monster that's hunted him isn't behind him or before him. It is him. The whole novel is a philosophical ritual, an initiation into wholeness. When Ged finally turns and faces the creature, he doesn't kill it, he names it Ged. And in naming it, he becomes whole. Le Guin and her magic system, where true names hold power, is a perfect metaphor for self-knowledge. To name something honestly is to bring it into the light. And that work, that act of naming, isn't only happening in stories. And that is one of the things that gives me hope right now. There are more and more people who are giving language to the parts of our humanity we once tried to hide. Think of voices like Brené Brown, Glennon Doyle, Jen Hatmaker, and so many others who've dared to speak about vulnerability, shame, belonging, and imperfection, the very emotions we were taught to bury. They're doing the same kind of magic Guin wrote about. When Brené names shame out loud, she strips it of secrecy. When Glennon calls messiness holy, she reframes the shadow as sacred ground. And when Jen speaks of faith that makes room for doubt, she's practicing what Ged did when he turned to face what frightened him most. They're all saying, in their own way, this too belongs. This too is me. To name something honestly, whether it's a spell, a story, or a feeling, is to begin bringing it home. Ged's journey is Jung's map in story form. Confrontation with the shadow, integration rather than destruction, and the realization that wholeness is not purity, but balance. Le Guin writes, "The wise man is one who never sets himself apart from the world. The shadow self isn't evil. It's simply the part of the world within us we've refused to touch." When we read Earthsea, we recognized something deeply human. Running from our darkness only gives it more power. It's the same truth we feel when Frodo fails to throw the ring away, or when Vin in Mistborn fears the violence inside of herself. Every character who matters must meet their shadow. After Ged faces his shadow in Earthsea, we might think the myth completes itself there, that it belongs to robed wizards and wind-worn islands. But the same pattern keeps surfacing, even in places that look nothing like Rogue Island. Take K-pop demon hunters. Bright colors, high energy, sharp choreography, it seems a world away from Le Guin's quiet seas. And yet, beneath the neon, it's wrestling with the same ancient problem. What do we do with the parts of ourselves we're afraid to claim? One of the demon hunters carries a secret. She's part demon herself. For most of the story, she hides it, fears it, even despises it. She believes that if the others knew, she'd lose their trust, and maybe even her own humanity. But the more she suppresses that side, the more pain she causes herself as well as the people around her. Her power becomes unstable, her mind fractured. It's only when she finally admits, yes, this is also me, that her strength settles into harmony. That's Jung's shadow integration rendered in motion and color. Le Guin had Ged name his darkness. This story asks us to embrace ours, to stop slicing the self into acceptable and unacceptable parts. The demon within isn't pure evil. It's simply the embodiment of everything that we've exiled: rage, grief, desire, difference. When acknowledged, it stops being a curse and starts being potential. What I love about this contrast, from the still waters of Earthsea to the electric pulse of modern soul, is that both stories whisper the same truth in different dialects of myth. Hiding the shadow hurts us more than facing it ever could. We're usually taught to fear our shadow before we even know what it is. As children, we're told to be good, but good often means acceptable. Don't be too angry. Don't be too sensitive. Don't talk too much. Don't cry. Don't want too much. So we learn, carefully, quietly, to shrink in order to feel safe. We bury our rage because it's labeled dangerous. We silence our grief because it makes people uncomfortable. We dull our brilliance so we don't outshine others. We call this maturity, but really, it's exile. Each time we disown a part of ourselves, we push into shadow. And those exiles don't disappear, they wait. They come back as anxiety, burnout, self-sabotage. Jung warned that the shadow, when ignored, doesn't vanish. It acts out. It leaks through the cracks. It shows up in the stories we tell about other people, in our judgment, our projections, our quiet resentments. But when we meet it with honesty, it changes form. It stops clawing for attention and starts offering wisdom. Our anger becomes protection, the voice that says, no more. Our envy becomes direction, pointing toward the unlived parts of our own life. Our fear becomes awareness, sharpening our senses, grounding us in the moment. Our grief becomes compassion, the understanding that loss is what opens the heart. All of it. Every emotion we were taught to control, avoid, or apologize for was never meant to be destroyed. It was meant to be integrated. When we stop running from these parts of ourselves, they stop chasing us. They finally exhale, and so do we. That's what Ged learns. That's what the demon hunter learns. The parts we're told are bad are often the parts that can save us and the world we live in, if we stop trying to destroy them. Fantasy gives us the courage to practice that kind of compassion. It says, look, this darkness isn't your enemy. It's the piece of you that still wants to be seen. So why does this theme keep returning, century after century, on stage after stage? Because to know ourselves, we have to recognize that goodness isn't the absence of darkness. It's the ability to meet it honestly. But meeting it honestly has a cost, not just within us, but around us as well. Because when you stop pretending to be only light, it unsettles the systems that profit from your pretending. Integration changes how you move, how you speak, what you will and will not accept, and that can make other people uncomfortable. Society teaches us to stay small because smallness is predictable. It teaches us to be polite instead of authentic, productive instead of whole. When you begin reclaiming your anger as protection, your sadness as empathy, your desire as direction, people notice. Some will call it rebellion, some will call it selfish. But it's neither. It's simply true. Jung said that the shadow we refuse to own, we project. But there's another side to that. The light we reclaim often exposes what others are still hiding from themselves. Integration has social cost because authenticity disturbs comfort. It upends hierarchies built on repression. It replaces performance with presence, and that presence is powerful. It can't be controlled by guilt or by fear any longer. That's why the world resists it, and why stories keep reminding us how necessary it is. In Earthsea, Ged's world literally shifts when he accepts himself. In Demon Hunters, the group must learn to trust the girl they once feared. In our world, it might look like setting a boundary or speaking a truth that costs you belonging in a space that only welcomed half of you. But the alternative, staying fragmented, forever performing, costs even more. When we integrate the shadow, we stop needing perfect heroes or pure villains because we understand both live inside all of us. That's why fantasy is such a healing form of philosophy. It lets us practice compassion for our own contradictions. Think of Frodo and Sam in The Two Towers. When Sam can no longer trust Gollum, Frodo says quietly, "I have to believe he can come back, because I have to believe I can." That line breaks me every time, because it isn't about saving Gollum, but also about saving the part of Frodo himself that he has in common with Gollum. Mercy in that moment is self-recognition. The compassion we offer to the shadow in another is a part of forgiving it in ourselves. So maybe the question isn't, how do I banish the demon? Maybe it's, how do I hold her hand? Because only then do we stop fighting ourselves and start becoming whole. Thank you for exploring the shadow with me. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who loves stories that glow a little brighter after they've been through the dark. And I'd love to hear from you. What story helped you face your own shadow? Was it a novel, a movie, a song, or a game? Leave a comment or tag at Philosopher's Tome Podcast so we can make this a dialogue, because every conversation helps illuminate the dark corners that we all share. Until next time, keep asking, keep imagining, and remember, even the dark has something to teach us. Well, thanks for wandering with me through today's ideas. The Philosopher's Tome is still opening its first pages, and I'd love your help shaping where it goes next. What questions do fantasy stories make you wrestle with? What novels, moments, or worlds have left you wondering why we're here or what it means to be human? Leave a comment, send a message, or tag me online. I'd love to hear which questions or books you'd like to explore in future episodes. After all, every good story is a conversation, and the best ones are the kind that we have together. Until next time, keep asking, keep imagining, and keep reading between the worlds.